All right. Well, once again, thank you everyone for joining us for the AP Academy Professional Development Series. My name is Allie Michael. I'm the coordinator for Academic Services and Engagement. We also have Rachel Carroll, who is our office supervisor, manager. I always get your title wrong, but she does everything for academic services and engagement. So she's here with us as well. We're really glad that you joined us today. We have a really special presentation, the Pedagogy of Care session. I've heard this session, I think 3 times. I believe this will be my 4th time to hear it. And every time I get something new out of it. So I'm really glad that y'all are joining us today. So we have Dr. Adriane Sanders and Dr. Chanda Murphy from the Department of Psychological Sciences and Counseling. Did I get that right? Yes, awesome. So I am just going to hand it over to them, and ladies, feel free to take it away.
Right, thank you. I'm going to be running the PowerPoint, so let me share that real quick. And as Allie said, Chanda and I have presented this more than once now, and I mean it obviously still matters, and we're so happy that that we are being able to share it with as many people as possible and continue to do that. So I do want to point out, so Chanda and I are both IO psychologists by training. And I've also added, she doesn't know I did this, but I also added mindfulness expert to Shanda's credential because that is what she is, in addition to her IO training. And this work was originally created by our interdisciplinary Pedagogy of Care task force. And so that included Johnny Ann Butterfield, Nicole Nickmeyer, Lisa Lewis, Chanda, myself, and Amanda Patrick. And so psych, sociology, and HHP experts all came together to build this out, and we hope to continue to do some things with this task force moving forward. So today we're going to share with you the slides that we created as a group, and we've got some examples that we'll go through, but we want to really try to leave time for questions at the end. So so if you have questions as they come up, feel free to drop them in the chat for sure, but then we hope to leave some time at the end to also have a conversation about these kinds of issues and what you're seeing in your own classrooms. So we're going to talk a little bit about the context of COVID. We still can't get away from that just yet. So we'll start there. Then we're going to talk about trauma in the classroom, the foundations for this idea of what we're calling pedagogy of care, how to adopt it, and then some main takeaways. And like I said, hopefully a little bit of workshop time at the end. So these first couple of slides are just to kind of give you the context of the world right now that you're very aware of, I'm sure. But just to orient us to some of these ideas together. So these are some of the most common ways that COVID has affected our students. So obviously stress or anxiety, disappointment or sadness, lost opportunities and outlets for things, certainly loneliness and isolation, financial setback with everything else that's going on, with their non-school lives, right? And relocation perhaps. And this survey was done earlier in the pandemic, which means crazy to think how long this has been happening. So long enough that we would have seen these outcomes start to manifest with our students. But I would imagine if we could do this today, these numbers might be even different and probably higher on all of these different factors, I would argue. Self-care tends to always be challenging for our students. I think it's not something they often are very cognizant of, taking the time for self-care, but it's certainly been challenging during everything going on. And so there's a few fast statistics, having trouble maintaining routine. Aren't we all, right? Struggling to get get enough physical activity, finding it challenging to stay connected with others. And actually, that's something I want to point out. Our focus is a lot on the students in this presentation and how those students as whole individuals, not just your students, but as full-fledged whole self beings that leave your classroom and carry on their lives, like what's coming in the classroom and how that may represent in your classes. But a lot of this also absolutely pertains to us as those who are leading them and teaching them and interacting with them every day as well. So so just to point that out, like we are going to say students a lot, but a lot of this is also like we are also struggling to find time for physical activity and connection and maintaining our routines and things like that. So how might trauma present in your classroom? We put together this infographic, and you're going to have access to these slides after the presentation for sure, so you can really dive deep into this and look at it. But all of these are just as true now. Shana and I were talking about this presentation earlier this week, and these are just as true as the day we wrote them, as they are today. None of this has changed. And the only one that might change, hopefully sooner than later, might be this COVID piece. The rest of it is always present in our classroom. And many of these have a synergistic effect with one another. They can exacerbate each other, these different buckets, if you will. So COVID, we've already talked a little bit about the ways that is showing up and manifesting as trauma in the classroom for our students and for us. But also like recently heightened social unrest, a lot of different fronts of social justice that are getting the light of day in the news, and that's really weighing heavily on everyone that's showing up in the classroom. Ongoing life stressors, so these are just your run-of-the-mill life stressors that are always there at some level in our lives. So self-care and social support, time management, health, physically and mentally. Also like life necessity kind of things like transportation, basic needs being met, those kinds of things. And then for some of our students and faculty, a relatively newer stressor is this online hybrid format. Some may not have opted into that willingly, right? And so for those who don't self-select to engage in online and hybrid learning, that's posed a real stressor for everyone involved. So not having sufficient or consistent communication in these online classes, lack of predictability, maybe materials aren't available in a timely manner. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about today certainly taps into all of these, but a lot of the practical applications, we're going to address those online hybrid classes, but then also ways to cope and manage these other stressors as well. So we're hoping you're going to walk away with some things that you could try out today if you wanted to. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time here, but just to show you kind of where this concept came from, this idea of what we didn't coin the term pedagogy of care, but we did kind of make this unique blend of what we're putting up under that umbrella of that title. So part of it, sorry, I've got a really sensitive mouth. Part of that is using trauma-informed pedagogy. And so you see that in some of the language that we're bringing up and we have already. And so that really comes out of more of the counseling side of the house of psychology. And then the other piece of this is engaged pedagogy, which comes from Hooks, and she's actually got a really wonderful, Bell Hooks is her name. She's got a really wonderful book, several books, but that deal with this. And so if this is something you're interested to take a deeper dive into, you can look into those resources. But so this is kind of where this idea came together, coming out of SOCH, coming out of counseling psych, coming out of IO psych, those different pieces. So how do we adopt this pedagogy of care? So we're going to talk about each one of these. I'm going to start with the first two, and then I'm going to hand it over to Chanda to talk about the next two. So we're going to look at each one of these categories, but to see it as a snapshot, we've tried to funnel down all the different things that might be relevant here to some actionable items that kind of fall under these four facets, if you will. So predict, flex, connect, and empower. And again, it's to help our students, but also us. So, and I know I'm moving fast because I know we always want to get through a lot of things. So again, please drop questions as we go and don't feel like we can't stop to have those conversations. So thinking about predictability and how this can help in our classes. So really thinking about the pragmatics of how we organize our classes in D2L. And all of this really helps. The more predictable something is, the better we're able to cope with it and deal with it. And so that's really where this idea generates from. So organizing your D2L classes in terms of time, right? So it's organized chronologically. That could be that your modules are laid out by the weeks. So week 1, week 2, week 3. If you teach in order of the chapters as they appear to the students in their books, you could do it by chapter. So each new module, each week is a new chapter. And I'll show you examples of this. But if you tend to skip around, maybe you don't want to go by chapter, you want to go by time. Having regular, consistent, and timely feedback. And so those are really 3 different things, right? And you really need all of them to help with this predictability aspect. So if your feedback is really infrequent, then it's not predictable. They don't know that they can rely on you to provide feedback when they need it. So this goes with assignments, grading of any kind, their course progress, if there's questions about that, discussion boards, all that kind of thing, especially changes. You know, we've always had that caveat, I think, that like these things are subject to change, these are tentative schedules, but we now know just how variable that can be. It may not be under our control. And so demonstrating to them by being consistent in your communication with students in the class that they will always know as soon as we do if changes are going to happen, and they can rely on you to inform them of those changes. Using reminders, it's very different not having that physical space to kind of remind them and clue them in on things that are happening in class that week or next week, or to have you physically standing in front of them saying the words to remind them. So using the announcements feature in D2L is another way to do that. Keeping the course layout consistent across the course and the semester. So this all really helps if you make the time to do this before the classes start. So like, you know, even if it's the week before classes become available, but laying it out then so you can kind of see the class from that high level perspective and organize it that way, build out the structure rather than piecemealing it where like, well, this week has some smattering of things in here, and this week I remembered to put this quiz in here, but I forgot the discussion board. So having it consistent throughout each week helps a lot. And then clearly communicating your expectations for the course about assessments and participation and all of that. You know, we're all teachers, and so we know that they rely on our syllabi when they read it for that guidance. But you know, sometimes we do a better job than others in our syllabi, like in the written piece of it. And so really making sure it's almost that you have to work harder to make that those expectations clear in the online format, because you may not be articulating it to them week after week. And so so here are some examples just real briefly, and again, you'll be able to access these on your own. But so here you can see this course is organized by the actual week. So week 1 runs January 14th through the 20th, week 2. And when you click in here, it's everything they need for that week. Here's another example. So doing it by chapter. So this is actually one from my class. I can't remember what class, it doesn't matter what class it is, but anyway, so I go in order of the chapters in that particular class. And so that's why I have it organized, like each week is a different chapter. This is another really great example. So the same idea here, it's organized by weeks and it shows what date the weeks start, but just this was another nice example of how you could build in some extra like articulation about the week. So in these previous examples, you click the module and it shows all the things that are in here. In this example, you click that week's module and they use the description feature for the name of the module to put in there, hey, welcome to this week. Here's what you're going to be doing this week. Here's what's due this week. Here's a cool picture that's going to engage you a little bit about this week's topic. And so you can be as fancy or as bare bones as you want. All of these are good examples of being very cleanly organized and easy to follow. Using the announcements feature, this is another example of that. So letting them know, hey, it's the end. It's coming up. Hey, I posted your grades on whatever this is. And I've got here as a bonus, one of the things that Chanda will talk about is connection. That's another piece that we're going to talk about. Using the announcements board to be more candid and conversational with the students is another way to demonstrate, like, I'm a real human being on the other side of this screen who recognizes you as a human being who are reading this, you know, and so it kind of just makes it a little bit more personable as well. And again, self-contained module. So when you click on week 1, everything they need for week 1 is linked in here. So that could be discussion boards, that could be a welcome video or whatever the video is for that week. But they don't have to go hunt around in D2L and all the different sub pages of D2L to find their class content. I go to this week's module and everything I need is linked right there, the Dropbox and everything. And these links will be live clickable when you get the PDF of the slides. So these also, a lot of this also falls under Quality Matters. I guess the rubric is what I would say. And that's what distance education adheres to, like when we want to design classes in online, we want to design online classes, we want to adhere to Quality Matters, and these are some of their principles as well. So it's just good all around. And then flexibility. So we want to be able to predict as much as possible, but we also want to be able to flex when it's necessary, right? And so building in structure and a skeleton at the beginning of the classes will enable you to be able to flex when you need to. So building out that full course skeleton before the class is open, even if you don't plan for it to be a fully online class, because guess what happens? Sometimes we get pushed to a fully online class before we know it, right? And so already having that built out, and plus the students have come to expect using D2L. You know, even pre-COVID, they were expecting that. And so going ahead and building things out, even if you don't need to use them each week, you already have the space built in where you can drop assignments or readings or whatever if you need to. Other ideas, offering diverse submission windows. So like if you have an assignment that's coming up, rather than just saying it's due, you know, it's due in the Dropbox at a certain time on a certain day, having them have a window of opportunity to turn that in. So I tend to default, like with my exams and things, I default to giving them some weekday and night, weekend day and night time. So I usually do Thursday through Sunday. So the students that are working on top of all of this can log in at night when it's more convenient, or on the weekend when they have, you know, a spouse to watch their kid or whatever. And so that can help allow more flexibility for the students in how they're completing the course, but it still keeps them on the same track as you want everybody. If it's feasible for your class, if it makes sense, allowing the students to work ahead, that can be a great source of convenience to them. Like when they have more time, they can work ahead, and then they're able to stay on track when they have less time. Your attendance and makeup policies. You know, I think, like I was saying about changes can happen. You know, I think a lot of us have these clauses in our syllabi about extenuating circumstances. Like I'll consider makeup work or a late assignment in extenuating circumstances. Well, thinking back to that picture of trauma and all the ways it may manifest in the classroom, the bar for what is extenuating circumstances, I think, is much lower. And so I think we think we need to accommodate that. And so just being mindful, it doesn't mean everything's willy-nilly and they just do it as they please when they please, but perhaps being more considerate or compassionate in those regards. You know, is the deadline really, does it have to be upheld so strictly when there are situations that call for a more relaxed timeline. And then also determining the non-negotiables. What are those? What are the things? What are the learning outcomes for your courses that if everything hit the wall and you could only get these things done, like what are those things? Like what are the things that they have to be able to progress in their program or to the next in a sequence if your class is in a sequence? What are the non-negotiables? And then knowing, okay, people are stressed or things have gotten crazy in the world around us or we need to take a break or whatever, then you already have kind of identified what you can toss out and decide not to do because you have full range to change things as you need to. This flexibility goes for you too, right? And so when you need to do that, you can feel confident that they're still getting the must-haves from this class, and it's allowing us to all be a little bit more compassionate with one another, and allowing space for all the other stuff that's happening in our lives right now. And so here are just a couple of examples of that, of providing that structure. So so this actually says like this contains all the assignments and objectives that you need to do this week. Giving those wide windows. So here for this particular exam, like it started on a Thursday at 12:01 in the morning, and they had until Sunday just before midnight to complete it. And that doesn't mean it works for everybody, but just thinking about these things, are there some of these things that you can implement in your classrooms? And now I'm going to turn it over to Chanda.
Thanks. I almost forgot to unmute myself. So one of the things that I do want to reiterate that Adriane talked about is that all this applies to us as well. In the mindfulness world, we talk about putting the oxygen mask on yourself before you can help anybody else. And so I think that that really goes into this first idea of connection, is having an active, authentic course presence. And Adriane has alluded to this quite a bit in terms of reminding them, hey, I'm human too. I know you are human, that life happens, etc. And for those of you that have been teaching last semester and into this one, you've seen, I'm sure, this tension level that is there that has never been there to this extent. And so, and a lot of us have been talking about it quite a bit lately too, because it's not going away. It's just getting a little bit worse. And I think it will for a little while. And like Adriane said, hopefully that COVID side of the trauma in the classroom will be gone at some point. But I think we also have to expect that it is going to maybe get a little bit worse before it gets better, even as the pandemic gets more under control, because then we're going to start seeing that relief aftermath of the trauma surfacing once we get out of survival mode. And so being honest with your students about who you are as a person, I think, is really important right now. And the more we can communicate, like she said, I think that helps with that authenticity. And I use my announcements page like crazy. And I will, if I'm like even a few days behind, because some of my students are like those overachievers that want their feedback the second they turn in their paper, I'll just post like, literally, I just made a cake with my child for her school project. Give me a couple more days. I didn't expect it to take this long, or what, and I just give them little pieces here and there about what's going on in my life, because we can all relate more than ever, I think, to each other, because everyone's world has been turned upside down in terms of what their typical schedule was and what life was before all of this. Also, I am an adjunct for Austin P and have been, this is my third year. And so I'm really authentic about the fact that I don't know a lot of the stuff. I'm in Memphis, Tennessee, never even been to the campus. So I don't know a lot of the stuff that's going on campus. I don't know a lot of specifics about Austin P. And so I tell all of my students that up front as well, so that I can tell them, maybe start to lean on each other a little bit, or if you need to ask me questions about Austin P, I can get you the answer, but I might not know the answer myself. And I think a lot of times as professors, we get caught up in that nervousness of, I need to know the answers to everything, like whether consciously we're aware of that or not. And so just to remind yourself, okay, it's okay not to know the answers to every single thing, especially as adjuncts are being part-time. I feel like that's where we always struggle in terms of connection ourselves. In terms of creating community, we talk about Maslow's pyramid and the need for belongingness, and that's like huge right now more than ever, and in terms of how all of us are in isolation. And so, like Adriane talked about, having to make more an effort to communicate our expectations, we have to make more of an effort to feel like we're communicating more. And it's going to feel like over communication, I think, a lot. I, on the side, run a swim team, and I feel like all I'm doing is flooding inboxes with emails of what's going on and what's changing and then I'll still get complaints that we're not communicating enough. So even when you feel like it's too much communication to your students, it's probably still the right amount. And so I think also, and I teach only in the master's program. I did teach one undergrad class last semester, but especially when you are fully online, recreating that team, that solidarity and belongingness environment is a lot more challenging. And so if you are at least getting to meet synchronously, that makes a big difference. But in some of these classes, we're asynchronous 100% of the time. And so how do you recreate that sense of belongingness? A lot of the students are really great at doing it themselves with all the apps they know, like GroupMe is huge for them. I encourage them from the very beginning of class to exchange information or get on a GroupMe together. I do some icebreakers in some of my classes where they have to pair up and exchange information. So, and I did this a lot in person, but you can do it online as well. I used to teach full-time at a liberal arts university here for years, and I had a lot of freshmen because I taught general psychology. And so, they're coming in, they don't know anybody. Sometimes my class is the very first college class they've ever walked into. And so we would pair up at the very beginning, get to know each other, and I would make them exchange some sort of contact information so they at least knew one other person their very first day in that classroom. And so I think where we can kind of, even if they don't ever talk to that person again, in an emergency, they have one person's number in the class or one person's email address. So where we can create that space to help with community, I think that really helps. Also, on my D2L page, I have a discussion board in like my general class information. I have a discussion board for technology issues or technology questions. I have a separate discussion board for Austin P questions or program questions. And it's just open the whole semester so that they have any issues, they can post them there. And then my other students that may have been at Austin P longer can help me answer those questions, or I can find answers for them. And that kind of just gives them that base as well to feel like they have a place to ask questions, maybe if they're not wanting to do it synchronously when you are together. The informal weekly check-ins, one of the things that I've started doing, and my students love it, is finding like a happy hour time. A lot of my students do work full time, so we pick like, I usually only do this once a semester, but my students stayed on for 3 hours the other night and did not want to leave. So we might be doing them more frequently. But there's such a craving for fellowship, for, getting to sit and talk with people that are going through the same things that they are, being in school together, and where you can provide that flat platform. I think that that's really important. And so you can do weekly check-ins, like maybe one-on-one, depending on how big your class is. You can do it just on the announcements page. Say, hey, give me a shout out if you need anything. I had a professor that used to have can't remember what she called it, but it was like a wins moment where we got to raise our hand and say, what was a win for this week? What was something positive that I got to do this week? And it'd be like, hey, I got a puppy. It could be anything. It didn't have to be course related. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can kind of do those weekly check-ins, take the temperature of how the class is doing and how your students are doing overall. Allowing time and space to discuss issues. I think this is kind of a given, but we forget about it when we're caught up in trying to check boxes when we need to get through those, need to know things Adriane's talking about and the learning objectives that we know we need to get through. And so just making sure we still allow that space. When we talk about some of the things that we can do at the beginning of class to allow for some mindfulness space, this can be one of those. Maybe the beginning of every class, you start with some sort of time and space to have a discussion. Maybe that is course related. Maybe it's something that you saw recently that you want to bring to the class and talk about. It's really up to you and what you're most comfortable with and how it fits into your environment. One of the things I always tell people is don't do it if it's not comfortable for you, because then you're just going to make it awkward. But if it's something that you feel confident in and that you really truly believe in and you want to bring to the classroom, then it's going to go over well because it's coming from your heart and what you're passionate about. I know that sounds fluffy, but it's been time tested, I think. And then facilitating peer support. That kind of sums everything we've already been talking about. I do group work. And they hate me at the beginning, and at the end they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you did that. We really bonded. She helped me with this. I really learned how to use the library, which I didn't really understand before. And so like just little things like that really make a difference when you can team them up in different ways. Also, and I talked about this in the last presentation I gave, we need our own peer support. So yes, facilitate it for your students, but find your own. Adriane knows this because she hired him as well, but another adjunct for Austin P, he and I will go back and forth all the time. I'm like, dude, like I'm maxed. I don't know how I'm going to grade any more of these papers. And he's like, well, I just scrapped mine. I was like, I'm in. Like, that sounds great to me. And so being able to pass back and forth, what you're feeling, how you're thinking, should I do this? There's been times with certain students where I'm like, man, I've given her a lot of grace and I just don't know that I should anymore, until, being able to bounce that off of somebody else to make you also feel more confident in you are doing the right thing. Because a lot of times we start to get in our own head, especially when we're dealing with our own trauma and our own stressors, that what we're doing might not be right, or might make us feel more guilty, whatever it might be, and how that affects you. Is Empower next? Yeah, no, still on Connect. Let's see. I talked through a lot of these already. I forgot we broke them down. The making sure they know who you are. Like if you don't have a bio on there, I always do a welcome video. I know Adriane does that as well, where I just talk about my background. And that, I think that helps, even if you're teaching in person, if you can distribute that prior to them coming to the classroom, and talk about helping with predictability, like just down to walking in and knowing who the professor is by their face. Because you think about how much anxiety there is, and when you walk in the classroom the first day, you're not sure who the professor is, and you might say something while the professor's sitting right there, but you don't know it's the professor. All those kind of things. I think being able to post a bio and a photo or a welcome video really help. Let's see. I talked through most of this. Okay, you can go to the next one. We'll come back if we need to. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about empowerment. I think when we are providing students with these resources, which once again might feel like we're overdoing it, but probably means we're doing the right amount if we feel like we're overdoing it, it really helps empower them to feel like they can ask questions when they need to, right? A lot of, especially online, it's really tough to get students to want to ask questions. And so just providing some of that, a lot of that information in the beginning, so that they feel like they have more of solid ground to ask questions and be empowered to do so, helps. One of the people that helped create this PowerPoint talked about how they do an anonymous survey at the beginning of the course, just to kind of get a temperature of the class, how they're feeling, maybe financially, what's going on in their lives, in terms of, do they have access to the internet if we fully shut down? Are they having trouble getting to and from campus if they have to come to campus? Those kind of things, so they can have that in mind on the front end, or you can have that in mind as a professor on the front end. In terms of choices of assignments, so as much as I hate it, we are still a very outcome focused society. And so it's going to be, what do I need to do to get the A? And stressing about my grades for an A. And with most, not all, right? And so one of the things that really helps with this as well is giving multiple assignment options. And I'm not saying necessarily if then for every assignment, or either or, like you can do a test or you can write a paper. We're not talking about that necessarily, but a multitude of assignments over the course of the semester. So I have discussions, I have quizzes, I have papers, I have little simulations that they can do online. Or if you have in person, maybe it's an attendance grade, whatever it might be, but offering many different options so that those that are great at multiple choice might rock the quizzes, but those that are better at writing might be able to rock the writing assignments, and then it helps balance that out. So where we can ease their stress in terms of offering a lot of different options, that helps empower them to feel like they are in control of their learning process. Also, and I'm pretty sure at the end, we have a link to a really great resource that has different articles and different books from many different authors from very many different cultures. And anytime that you can work that in with different perspectives from different cultures, I think that that's really huge. A lot of times, and what I really love is my students will say something. They will point out, where a text or an assignment they had was really biased or stereotyping, And it's probably because this is at the grad school level and it's kind of their job in IO to be able to find those things. But it's really great then because you can have that discussion and bring in other material. You can also ask students for, depending on the class you're in, maybe for suggestions about things that they've seen, right? Things that they've read, maybe something that they can bring in. And that can be part of an assignment, or bringing in something that they've seen in society or read, especially right now, and want to present to the class. So that's another way to kind of bring that all in together. Creating emotional space in the classroom. I think that this is kind of like what we've talked about already. You lead authentically and create space for community, and create space on that front end of zero tolerance, I guess is a good way to say it. Then I think that you meet this creating that emotional space in the classroom. One thing that I talk about over and over and over again as parents, as teachers, anytime you're interacting with another human being, the behavior you want out of that person, you want to be modeling as well. So if you can be vulnerable in a space, if you can be have the tough conversations, if you can do those things in a very compassionate way, then your students are going to want to model that behavior. But if you can't carry yourself in that way, you're not going to get it out of them either. I give this example all the time of someone I've worked with, and she had all of her teachers read this book on mindfulness and is asking them to be mindful and teach mindfulness in the classroom. And at the time, it was because it was getting really big in the school system. And when I asked her what her mindfulness practice is, her answer was, "Oh, I don't need any of that." Well, okay. So, and she's wondering why things aren't working, right? And so I just use that example all the time because it's a perfect example. Let me see how many times I can say example. It's a perfect representation of what can happen when you're not actually modeling the behavior you want to occur. And as parents, we see that all the time. I probably don't have to reiterate on that. And then the last thing we want to talk about are these grounding tools. In a time when the world feels like it's on its head and where you don't see that much of a light at the end of the tunnel, it's a glimmer, I think, but we're not quite there yet where we can see the way out. Ways that we can ground ourselves, ways that we can feel reconnected, is so powerful, because then we feel like, once again, giving empowerment to students, we're giving empowerment back to ourselves if we feel like we're back in control in some way. And so let's talk a little bit more about what some of those things are. One of this free write journaling thing I started maybe it was about 4 years before I left my full-time job. I taught freshmen for about 8 years. And about halfway through is when I got into mindfulness. And when they would come in the classroom, and the freshmen, this is most powerful with freshmen, but I think it works with any age group, obviously, or any class level. But the day one they came in, I told them they had to get one of those, can't even remember those composition books, those little black composition books. They could get anything they wanted, but I recommended that because it was like $1. And I said, every time you come in this class for the first 2 minutes, we're going to write. And you're going to write whatever you want. Now, I know some people that have done this and they give them prompts to write about, like maybe gratitude or things that stress you out, etc. But I would let them do this free write. And they would look at me like I was absolutely crazy. And it happened every single semester. And I told them, I said, you can write for the 2 minutes how much you hate this. You can write a to-do list. You can draw, whatever it is, this is your 2 minutes. And the reason we did that is because we don't know what they have experienced even just moments before they walked in our classroom or logged into our Zoom call. So to give them that 2 minutes of space to clear their head in either a stream of consciousness, getting it out on paper, or just to recenter themselves is so empowering. And as a professor, it's so much easier on you because they now can focus on what you're about to say because they got out of their head whatever emotional issues they came into the classroom with. And I kind of took that a step further, and it works because I teach psychology, but about halfway through the semester, I had them, and I don't read them, I don't take them up. They got a grade based on attendance. So if they were there and did their journal, they got some sort of extra points for that, like extra credit at the end. But what was so amazing is I would have them go through and flip through their books about halfway through. And I said, many of you can probably find themes. And they're like, yes. And I said, let's think about those themes going forward and see, are those things good themes that you're seeing? Are they stressors that keep popping up over and over again? And so I turned it into kind of a project as well for them to do some introspection. And then at the end of the semester, I always have on my last test, like, what is one thing you'll continue or that you took from this course that you'll use later? And meaning content from the class. But every single time it was, I will continue journaling. That was the most important thing for me to get through this year, and I will continue to do that. So where you can offer that space to do that, I think is really great. It works best in synchronous settings. So even online, you could take the first 2 minutes, say, okay, we're gonna sit here and free write where you are, and then we'll get started. Another great thing is a mindful moment. I think Allie said you started using this and that you liked it too, just because it gave you time, right? So one of the best ways to do this too is say, look, guys, I need a minute. So that's going to be what we do at the beginning of every class. We're going to sit here and take a few breaths. One thing that I do caution is one of the trauma-based mindfulness. One of the things we talk about is breath is not always comfortable for people. Now with COVID, it is really a trigger. So always, if you're going to say, let's take a few minutes, you can say to take a few breaths, just to have a moment of silence, or if you're going to feel yourself grounded in the seat, just to forget whatever came before you walking in the classroom today. So that's something just to think about when you are taking just a few moments at the beginning of class for some quiet. The other thing too that I started using quite a bit is reframing thinking. So there's a ton of research out there that talks about how gratitude is one of the best ways to reset ourselves in terms of stress, in terms of overall health. And so when the example I always give is students will get to the point where they're super overwhelmed, and this really works well with what's going on in the world today. And they'll just see class as one more stressor. And so what I try to teach them to do, and it's a perfect example of reframing the way they're thinking of things, is I say, can you think of class, the time you're with me for the next 50 minutes or hour and a half, whatever it is, as a break from what's going on in the rest of your world. And that came from personal experience of going through some real hard times when my mom was really sick. But I went and taught because it was the 50 minutes away from what was really going on in my life that I got to focus on something else. And so when my students right now are starting to get really stressed out because of work, I say, or because of the schoolwork on top of everything else, I say, can you use your schoolwork as almost an escape in a way from whatever else is stressing you out? And once you have them reframe that thinking, it really makes a big difference. And then they can use that reframing in other ways too. In terms of being grateful for the fact that I am getting to go to school in times like this, or, being grateful that I have the opportunity to sit with people when a lot of people are still stuck at home. So there's a bunch of different ways you can teach them to start reframing the way they think. And one of the other things too that we talk a lot about is our issues with technology and our relationship with technology, which could be an entirely different talk. And so now that we are having to use technology for our jobs more than ever, in terms of our students being on Zoom or having to use D2L when before they were, maybe actually just typing up their papers and turning them in and not necessarily having to do everything else on Zoom, we have got to remember, not only for them, but ourselves as well, to turn off. And one of the things I've told my students this semester, and hoping, and I know they can't all model it because their schedules are all so different, but I've basically told them, I said, I don't get on my computer at all on the weekends this semester. I just cannot. I said, last semester I overdid it. And I talk about being vulnerable and authentic. I've told them, I said, I totally burned out because I wanted to get back to you guys on time. I spent my weekends grading, and I was on the computer all week and then sat on the computer all weekend grading. And so to find that time where you can personally say, I am not going to get on my computer today, or I'm not going to get on my computer from these hours. And then maybe take that a step further and also talk to your students about, so don't go turn on the TV. Don't go sit on your phone. Go play your music. Go, mindful Legoing is becoming a very big thing right now. Go build your adult Legos, go color. Like, there's so many things out there that I keep talking, puzzle, right? I picked up cross-stitching during COVID, not cross-stitching, embroidery during COVID, because I needed something else that had nothing to do with the screen. And so I think where we can encourage that now more than ever as the way for them to take those brain breaks and those technology breaks, I think it's really important, because many times we do things and we're so used to it that we take it for granted. When we can share that with some other people, they're like, oh, it's like a light bulb moment. It's like, oh, I didn't realize that's why I have headaches at the end of the day. I didn't realize that's why I'm so fatigued and don't want to talk to my husband or child or whatever by the end of the day. And so being able to share those practices that you do with others, I think that's really huge as well. So main takeaways, and then I think we're going to pretty much open it up for questions and any kind of discussion, is care, compassion, respect, and grace. First for yourself, and then for others, because we cannot do that for others if we're not taking care of ourselves. So just keeping that kind of as a mantra in the back of your head. Remembering about what's going on with our students in terms of coming from many different cultures, different diversities, also food insecurities that are popping up that more than ever, people that would never think that might have issues with those kind of things financially. I think just keeping all that in the forefront, I think, is really important, which all goes back to compassion, right? Just keeping things in mind that everyone is struggling in some way. Being sensitive to the burden of women and other caregivers. The research is already talking about how, there's even more happening or more of a burden on women and other caregivers now more than ever, because the kids are at home, or we're taking care of sick family members, or we're struggling because we can't take care of sick family members because of COVID. And so just remembering that's going on a lot more with our female students specifically. Okay, so I kind of talked about this already, the KISS method. I'm big on that. If you're not confident in something, then don't add it. Like, I added a whole nother level to my class this semester using a Pearson MyLab. And in some ways it's awesome and I love it. In other ways, I'm like, maybe should have never, added it to the class. But, you got to try, but do it when you know that you have the space and the energy to be adding those things, and don't feel like you have to go overboard with it, because the students right now are just getting through as well. And so for you to just try to get through the best you can and deliver the best course content you can, I think, is what is important. And this care-based pedagogy is not discipline specific. It across boards, right? It doesn't matter what department you're in, you're going to have the students struggling with the same thing. We as professors are going to be struggling with the same thing no matter where we are. And so just keeping that in mind, although I know it feels very heavy psychology through a lot of this applies everywhere. So I think with that, we're ready to take questions if people have it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and folks, you can feel free to unmute yourself to ask a question or share any thoughts you may have, or feel free to type those in the chat box and we can share them for you, whatever you're most comfortable with. And also, I do want to say we had a few people join us later in the session. So we are recording this and we'll have the session posted later today. So you can always go back and catch up on what you may have missed.
Allie, I like that you made the point in the chat about how to refer to you. Yeah, because that's a professor preference as well, beyond just what your title might actually be. The other thing too, that I think allowing your colleagues to know what you like to be addressed as, that's one of my stressors, is when I'm on a call with people that I know and I don't know if they want to be called doctor or don't, or first name, or so just kind of knowing that information and letting people know that.
True. And I think so as adjunct and part-time instructors too, there's a lot of variation in our academic backgrounds. And so since I teach mostly freshmen and sophomores, many of them are coming into college with some stress and anxiety. And so kind of taking that away and saying, hey, you can call me instructor, professor, you can just call me Allie. That's fine. Just don't be afraid to talk to me. So.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
Well, and I'm going to click through just to show you, and then I'll stop sharing the screen. But there's some additional tips that are at the end of the slideshow that you all can have. So like with scheduling, so Zoom specific, some D2L specific help files, and then our references and other outside resources that really, we relied on in pulling this content together and all kind of vetted and felt like these would be good resources to share out. Let me see, I think that's actually, yeah, that's the end of it. I mean, is anyone, I mean, it's putting you all on the spot, but is there anything anybody's struggling with right now, particularly in classes? I mean, we're in what, week 4, I guess, of this semester. Or anything anyone's struggling with personally? Or maybe you don't want to share that struggle.
Allie, do you want to talk about doing the like couple minutes in the beginning of class? Because you just started doing that not that long ago, right?
Yeah, I actually just started last semester. I had previously had a piece that I would do where I would kind of talk about different things that they could do if they, practiced yoga or mindfulness or anything like that. I would just talk about it. But then after listening to your session during the pre-semester calendar, you gave me that idea. And one day I had been in a Zoom meeting right before my class, and I had to race across campus to get there. And I was stressed, and I could tell my heart rate was up, and I was, I wasn't in the right frame of mind to start class like that. And so I told everybody, I said, if y'all don't mind, let's just take a few minutes, because I remembered what you had said. So let's just take a few minutes. Let's take a few deep breaths, clear our minds, so that we can be in the right frame of mind. And I said, I need this just as much as y'all do. And so we did that. And then it helped so much that we made it a practice. And before every class, we would do that. And in my evaluations at the end of the semester, I had 3 different students that talked about that, saying how much they appreciated that and how they'd never had that before. So I thought, well, I'll keep it. So
that's so cool. One of the things too that I think is really funny is the conditioning that happens. So if you forget, they're gonna be like, wait, I didn't have my few moments to breathe, so I'm gonna need you to stop for a second, take it back. So I think that then then it's working when they're reminding you that to take that time.
Well, if there aren't any other thoughts or questions, we can go ahead and wrap up. Thank you both so much, Dr. Sanders and Dr. Murphy. We so appreciate your insight and your suggestions and your time joining us this afternoon. I know once again, I have some great takeaways that I'm going to try to incorporate into my course. I'm teaching my first online course this semester, or my first online synchronous course. So that's been fun. But like I said, we will have this recording available later. I did want to let everybody know about our next AP Academy session that we have coming up. We have these every 2 weeks. So our next one is going to be on Tuesday, February 23rd at 2:00. And it's going to be on teaching skills and techniques with Dr. Sherry Prosser from the College of Education. So I hope that you'll all join us for that. I will send out a link for that. I'll send out an announcement email next week. So please join us then. We thank you for spending your afternoon with us. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the day, and stay safe and stay warm with the impending ice apocalypse.
Get your bread and milk sandwiches ready to go. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us and letting us speak with you all today. Appreciate it.